Ethan Cole had never felt a morning like this. The city outside his window was alive, busy, buzzing with cars and footsteps and the distant hum of traffic. Yet inside his apartment, the air felt frozen. His hands shook as he held his phone, staring at the email that had arrived in the dead hours of the night. The screen's glow reflected in his eyes, wide with disbelief. "We regret to inform you that due to concerns regarding financial misconduct, your partnership in Cole and Mercer is hereby terminated." He read it again, hoping the words would somehow change. But they didn't. They were fixed, cold, and absolute. His name, his work, the company his father had started, and he had spent years building, were all being stripped away in a few sterile lines. The betrayal wasn't abstract. It was personal, surgical, and deliberate. He leaned back in his chair, trying to process. How could this happen? He had been partners with Daniel Mercer for 15 years. 15 years of late nights, difficult decisions, and shared victories. Daniel had been more than a friend, he had been a brother in every sense but blood. And yet here he was, apparently complicit in an orchestrated plan to erase Ethan from the company they had built together. Ethan's mind raced. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe the board had been misled. Maybe Daniel had been trying to protect him. He wanted to believe that he needed to believe that. But the tone in Daniel's voice during their last call came back to him, flat and unshaken. "You. No, I didn't do this," he had said, voice taut with desperation. Daniel had sighed. The board voted. There was evidence, Ethan. I couldn't protect you. Couldn't protect him? Ethan had trusted Daniel with everything, his father's legacy, his own reputation, every detail of the company's operations. And Daniel had let him fall. Or worse, maybe Daniel had caused the fall himself. Ethan's fingers dug into the armrest of his chair, as his anger started to simmer beneath the initial shock. The city outside his window continued its normal rhythm, completely unaware that, for Ethan, nothing would ever feel normal again. Every sound, every flicker of light seemed sharper, as if the world had conspired with Daniel to mock him. He tried calling his sister, hoping for clarity, some anchor of support. But even her words were cautious, tentative. "Ethan, are you sure there's nothing you haven't told me?" she asked, worry threading through her voice. Even she, someone who had stood by him through everything, seemed unsure whether she could trust what had happened. He hung up and felt a wave of loneliness wash over him. It wasn't just about the money or the company. It was about trust. Betrayal cut deepest when it came from someone you had loved, someone you had considered family. And Daniel, in that moment, felt like both. Ethan had spent the next few hours pacing the apartment, his mind spinning faster than his feet could move. He reviewed every interaction he had had with Daniel over the last year, replaying emails, meetings, and even casual conversations in his mind. Patterns emerged, small things he had missed at the time. Daniel's subtle hesitations when discussing new clients, the extra time he seemed to spend with certain investors, the way he had avoided answering direct questions about some of the company's finances. At first, he tried to convince himself that it was coincidence. But the more he thought, the more he realized he had been blind. He had trusted Daniel implicitly, and that trust had been his greatest weakness. By midday, the anger had transformed into action. Ethan grabbed his coat and left the apartment, walking briskly through the city streets. The noise, the movement, the life outside, it all felt surreal compared to the storm inside him. He drove straight to Daniel's house, the familiar route now strange and tense. He didn't allow himself to imagine a peaceful resolution. He only knew he needed answers, and he needed them face to face. Daniel opened the door before he could knock. His calm expression, the almost casual tilt of his head, was a punch to the gut. "Ethan," he said, as if nothing had happened. "You know why I'm here," Ethan said, his voice low but rigid with controlled fury. "I do," Daniel replied, his tone even, measured. "But there isn't much I can say." Ethan stepped inside despite the invitation to remain outside. Every inch of the house seemed meticulously curated, as though Daniel's life was carefully staged. It felt wrong that everything looked normal, that Daniel appeared so unshaken while Ethan's life had been turned upside down. "You let them do this," Ethan said, pacing. "You knew what they were going to do, and you didn't stop it." Daniel shook his head slightly, almost mournfully. "I didn't have a choice. The board needed someone to bear the blame. I thought you'd recover. I thought you were strong enough. You ruined me," Ethan shouted, the words echoing in the grand hallway. He saw the flicker of guilt in Daniel's eyes, but it vanished almost immediately, replaced by that calm, unyielding mask. "My father's legacy. Everything we built together. You've taken it all." Daniel's voice was steady. "I did what I had to do to survive. You'll understand one day." Ethan's hands curled into fists. Understanding? He could never understand someone who betrayed him with such cold calculation. The weight of the betrayal pressed down on him like a physical force, making it difficult to breathe, to think clearly. Every memory of their friendship now felt like a lie. Every shared joke, every business success, they were all tainted by Daniel's deception. He left Daniel's house in a blur, barely noticing the drive home. The streets seemed unfamiliar, the city itself a stranger, a world that had betrayed him alongside Daniel. When he returned to his apartment, he collapsed onto the couch, exhausted not from physical exertion, but from the storm of emotions raging inside him. Grief, anger, disbelief, humiliation, all collided in a way that left him hollow yet sharp, vulnerable yet simmering with a new, dangerous resolve. He spent the evening alone, replaying the events over and over, analyzing every word, every action, every subtle hint he might have missed. Ethan knew he had two choices: to let this betrayal define him, to live in the shadow of Daniel's actions, or to find a way to reclaim what had been stolen, not just his company, but his dignity, his name, his life. By the time the city lights flickered on and painted the apartment in shades of gold and orange, Ethan's resolve had solidified. The betrayal had awakened something in him he had never felt before. It was not just a desire for justice, it was a hunger for retribution, tempered by the need for precision and control. He could feel it coiling within him, ready to be directed. With focus, if only he could plan carefully, strike at the right moment. Ethan understood that revenge was a dangerous path, one that could consume him if he let it. But for the first time in days, he felt alive. The betrayal had not broken him, it had sharpened him, forced him to see the truth of the people around him, and the fragility of trust. He opened his laptop and began gathering information. Old contracts, emails, financial statements, anything that could give him insight into how Daniel had orchestrated this betrayal. Each document he reviewed, each pattern he uncovered, only deepened the sense of injustice, but also built a foundation for the plan that was beginning to form in his mind. Late into the night, Ethan worked tirelessly. He wasn't just planning retaliation. He was meticulously understanding the mechanics of the betrayal. He traced every transaction, every decision, every subtle influence Daniel had exerted over the board. Patterns emerged. Small manipulations, carefully timed actions. Daniel had been preparing this fall for months, if not longer, and Ethan had walked right into it, blind and trusting. But now he was awake. Now he could see clearly. By the time he finally leaned back, exhausted but focused, Ethan knew that the world had changed for him. The betrayal had not only taken his company, it had ignited a fire, a purpose that was as consuming as it was precise. And as he stared at the city outside, the hum of life continuing oblivious to his personal devastation, he realized that he would not rest until the scales were balanced, one way or another. He wasn't just a victim anymore. He was a man with a plan, and Daniel Mercer had just become his target. The first phase of revenge had begun, though Ethan did not yet know the exact path it would take. All he knew was that the betrayal had been personal, calculated, and deliberate, and that meant the response would need to be equally deliberate, precise, and unyielding. By the time dawn crept over the horizon, Ethan sat in silence, staring at his hands. He could feel the weight of what was coming. The anger had settled into something colder, something more focused. It was no longer just fury, it was strategy. And in that clarity, he realized that the betrayal had not destroyed him. It had forged him, and forged him into someone willing to do whatever it took to reclaim what had been stolen. Ethan's world had narrowed. The betrayal still burned in his chest, but the raw shock had shifted into something sharper, colder, a need for action. He spent days locked in his apartment, poring over old files, invoices, and emails. Every document he touched told a story he hadn't noticed before. Every number, every line, every casual comment Daniel had made now hinted at manipulation. It was meticulous, deliberate, calculated. Daniel hadn't just betrayed him. He had orchestrated a perfect 4. At first, Ethan considered confrontation. He imagined storming into Daniel's office, slamming the documents on the table, exposing him for the world to see. But then he realized that raw anger wasn't enough. Impulsive actions could backfire. If he wanted justice, he had to be precise. He had to control every step, every detail. This wasn't just about satisfaction. It was about reclaiming his life without destroying himself. He reached out quietly to Priya, a former accountant who had worked under Daniel. She had left the firm weeks earlier, frustrated and disillusioned. Over coffee in a dim cafe, she slid a folder across the table, her hands trembling slightly. Ethan took it with a steady grip. Inside were transaction logs, emails, and evidence of money moving to shell accounts. Daniel had tried to make it look like Ethan was responsible, but the truth was clear. Every fraudulent move led straight back to him. Ethan felt a surge of vindication, but it was fleeting. Proof was one thing, action was another. If he went public, now, he could destroy Daniel's career instantly. Headlines would scream betrayal, fraud, and scandal. Daniel would lose everything. And yet, the thought left a bitter taste. He remembered the employees who trusted Daniel, the clients who relied on the firm, the innocent people whose lives could collapse if the company imploded. Revenge, he realized, had consequences far beyond satisfaction. He spent nights pacing his apartment, debating every angle. Every time he imagined Daniel falling publicly, he felt a thrill. But every time he imagined the collateral damage, the cost to innocent lives, he recoiled. The rage in his chest was matched by a moral tension he couldn't ignore. Was it enough to prove himself innocent? Or did he have to strike back to feel whole? The struggle consumed him. He replayed conversations, in his mind, analyzing Daniel's justifications. Daniel had told the board Ethan was reckless, unstable, a liability. In his mind, Daniel had painted Ethan as guilty to protect the firm and perhaps even himself. Ethan could almost hear Daniel's calm, measured voice defending his actions. It wasn't personal. It was survival. Ethan's anger boiled again. Survival? At the cost of destroying another person's life? The more he thought about it, the more he realized Daniel had seen Ethan as expendable. And that knowledge fueled him. He was no longer just angry. He was focused. Every action, every choice he made now had to serve one purpose: reclaim the truth and protect himself without losing control. He spent hours constructing plans, testing scenarios in his mind. One approach was public exposure. Another was legal action. Another, more subtle, was negotiation. Each option carried weight. Exposure promised satisfaction but risked collateral damage. Legal action promised justice but could drag him into months of uncertainty. Negotiation offered control but required restraint, something he was not yet sure he possessed. Amid all this, he noticed a change in himself. The betrayal had sharpened made him more aware of people's motivations and intentions. He could read conversations differently now, noticing the subtleties he had once missed. Every action Daniel had taken now seemed deliberate, every excuse carefully crafted. The betrayal had taught him to see behind the mask people wore. Late one night, Ethan made a decision. He would gather all the evidence, but he wouldn't act immediately. He would wait. He would watch Daniel, observe him, understand his next moves. In doing so, Ethan realized he was not merely planning revenge. He was learning patience, discipline, and control. The fire in his chest remained, but it had transformed into a tool rather than a blind force. He also began considering the psychological side of revenge. Would exposing Daniel truly heal him, or would it trap him in bitterness forever? He recalled the sleepless nights, the humiliation, the loneliness. Acting in rage might offer temporary satisfaction, but at what cost to his own peace? The conflict wasn't just about Daniel, it was about Ethan himself. Could he take action without losing himself in the process? The days blurred together as he alternated between research and observation. Every conversation, every movement Daniel made was noted. Ethan realized that to truly reclaim his life, he needed more than evidence. He needed leverage, control, and clarity. Every choice carried consequences, and he weighed them carefully. Finally, after nearly 2 weeks of preparation, Ethan felt the moment approaching. He had enough evidence to act, yet he had also cultivated a sense of restraint he hadn't known. He possessed. The choice wasn't about power anymore, it was about wisdom. He could destroy Daniel, expose him to the world, and prove himself right. Or he could act with precision, correcting the wrongs without succumbing to vengeance itself. As Ethan sat in his apartment that night, the city lights flickering outside, he realized the true lesson of betrayal. It didn't just hurt. It taught. And sometimes, the hardest battles weren't against the person who wronged you. They were against your own impulses, your own desire for immediate satisfaction. He knew the next step would be critical. He would need courage, strategy, and an unwavering focus. The conflict had brought him to the edge of action, but he understood now that the moment of truth, the climax of his struggle, was yet to come. And when it did, he would have to choose. Not only how to confront Daniel, but what kind of man he wanted to be afterward.